insights are not out there or haven't been out there publicly, and you don't hear about them as much at conferences. There was recently, as the panelists are coming up, a study that I was part of. I've sat on the Popeye Marketing at Retail. It's a nonprofit board. And as a member, I sat on originally for Frito-Lay and PepsiCo, and now as a member of my own company. We invested in a $500,000 research project. So I'll have my panelists come on up. And part of that research project was to do both the rational, the intercept work of people in their real grocery stores with eye-tracking equipment on 210 of those 2,400 people that we did pre-post interviews of them shopping in their real grocery store. And 210 not only had the eye-tracking equipment on them, but they had an EEG cap on them. And the benefit of that piece of research is it's public information. So it's been publicly shared. The companies, CPGs, have been funding that study retrospectively to get their own insights around their categories. So as somebody went down their aisles, what did they see and how was their brain responding? So the more of this that we can do in collaboration with others, where we could share our findings and those insights. And so I'm excited about the journey. It's always exciting to be on the cutting edge and be with a company that is making investments like I had at PepsiCo. But it's also exciting to see us now layering on to those insights. So we have the privilege today to see a very large panel. So my challenge today is to take a very large panel and keep us tight on time. So what I want to do first is give this panel, there's 3 objectives we really want to conquer. We want to talk about how they're using it with their end clients and what are the key learnings. And so I'll be selecting a few of them to give us some examples. We'll be talking about when it doesn't work or how to integrate it into traditional methods. And we'll be talking about some watch outs as well as some aha moments that they've had. So let's start. We'll go ahead and start at the far end here. They're going to give a really brief introduction of who they are and what they do.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Walter Mukute. I work with Estima Neurobion Marketing. It's a company formed by a merger of 2 research companies, one 23 years old, that I founded 23 years ago, so I'm kind of older than I look, maybe. And a 10-year-old neuroscience company that was founded in Italy 10 years ago. Our aim is mainly to cross the bridge, to cross and join and apply neuroscience to, I wouldn't say legacy, but traditional methodologies that we use all around the world. And one of the things that we came with, and I think it was an innovation, was neuroMystery shopping. Because I typed in Google neuroMystery shopping, or neuroMystery shopping, and it says 0 results. When you get something in Google that says 0 results, wow. Or it doesn't exist, or is it true innovation? And that's what we did. So I'll leave it to the next one. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll have to let you all calibrate my accent because I'm Australian. So my name's Ken Roberts, and I'm president of Forethought Research. We're in New York and in Melbourne. And we do marketing research looking at the drivers, the rational and emotional drivers of decision-making. And so we have highly predictive models of both the emotion and the rational drivers for changing business outcomes. And our clients use that in their creative and see direct results in terms of increasing market share. So that's a little bit about Forethought.
My name is Dan Hill. I run a company called Sensory Logic for the past 15 years. Pioneers in the field with a substantial U.S. patent portfolio. 3 books, including Emotionomics, chosen by Ad Age as one of the top 10 must-read books of 2009. We've worked with about 40% of the top 100 global marketers. You may have also seen me on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, New York Times on the last 3 presidential election cycles.
And my name is Anders Bengtsson. I'm CEO of Protobrand, which is a Boston-based research and branding consultancy. We specialize in online metaphor elicitation. For those of you familiar, metaphor elicitation was pioneered some 20 plus years ago. We've now brought this into an online environment, which enables the use of technology to reach larger sample sizes. While it's probably not a neuroscience technology or methodology itself, metaphor elicitation enables people to express their emotions, their deep-seated thoughts and feelings through language. So it's actually a technique that I think can bridge many of the core neuroscience-focused methodologies. Metaphor elicitation can actually bring them or bridge them, and we can get to a more comprehensive understanding.
Hi, I'm Rana El-Kayyubi. I'm a co-founder and chief scientist at MIT startup called Affectiva. We're all about emotion measurement with automated, scalable, unobtrusive facial coding technology.
My name is Siep Ruel. I'm part of NeuroIEX. Basically, the research that was applied here in America showed that people cannot predict their own behavior. And people, if we scan them in an fMRI machine, then the fMRI machine can predict behavior. So that research was discovered here on the West Coast, and the Dutch people thought, well, if we cannot invent it, then let's apply it. And the Dutch team of NeuroIEX, together with the University of Amsterdam, has been working on commercial applications for fMRI. And that's what we have discovered now. And most interesting is that we have created a brain map that triggers and that tells us when an Effie award will be won by a commercial. So basically, if there is a commercial and we scan it, we can predict if it's going to be an Effie or not.
Hello, my name is David Forbes. I am the founder of the Forbes Consulting Group, and in the last half dozen years, I've had the pleasure of building and working with a tool called MindSight. MindSight is a little different look at emotion in that we're studying the kind of emotion that was evoked in that very last slide that Carolyn put up when we had that lovely picture of the child and the puppy. We study the kinds of emotions like feelings of nurturance and mastery and achievement and those things that are basically have been the purview of psychologists studying motivation really for the last 100 years. We have devised a way using neuroscience techniques to expose people very rapidly to images which are tied to these core motives, we call them, and with that we're able to explore on behalf of our clients unmet needs in a particular lifestyle space. We're able to expose advertisements and understand what kinds of emotions are evoked, both positive and negative, and I'll tell you some stories about that perhaps in a minute. Thanks for coming.
Great, thank you. I will say one thing that I have noticed. I've been part of several conferences, one on multisensory that took place in Germany in the fall. I've just been invited to be part of a neuromarketing conference. So what I'm seeing happening globally is there is very much interest in neuromarketing globally, maybe more so in the US. So if you Google search neuromarketing, you will find much more activity globally. I think here in terms of dollars that was invested in this, it's greater in the US. So there's interest in how we apply it globally. They're using the senses a bunch in terms of how does this affect taste, how it smells, all of that stuff. So I welcome an international board here or panel today. What I want to do is go through some questions, and I will have to apologize. My international folks, I think, were in air when some of these questions went out last week, and maybe I didn't hear back from every single panelist. So I'm going to defer to a few of you and make you talk, even though I don't know what your responses might be. So first I want to start with, of the folks that we're working with, that you've been working with, and I'm going to start with Rana first. You gave an example of a client that you've been working with, and how do you take this science and apply it to a brand? Because what brands want to do is sell more stuff, essentially. So can you give me an example?
Well, we work, as I said, through facial coding technology, and I see the value we add through two things: diagnostic and also predictive. On the diagnostic side, I think I'll share my my India example because that's my favorite.
I love that example.
So we were testing this ad in India, and it's a body lotion ad. And basically, you know, this wife comes up, she's wearing a sari, and her midriff is really showing. And then her husband walks up to her, and they're very playful, and he touches her midriff. Now, I'm Egyptian, and that's kind of, you know, pushing it. And so anyways, the respondents, mostly women, married women, were asked at the end of the ad what they thought of the ad. Now, most women either did not mention that scene at all, or they basically said, oh my God, you know, this is really offensive, you need to cut this scene out. But then when we went through the facial expressions of these women, every single woman, there was about 100 of them, smiled at exactly that scene. So that's an example where your nonverbals don't match your, your verbals, because these women were being politically correct, but their facial expressions showed a different emotional state. So I thought that was interesting.
Very interesting.
And the client actually ended up airing the ad as it is. They did not cut the scene.
Great. Thank you for the example. Okay, Sib, I'm going to ask you a little bit about what you've done from an advertising standpoint of testing some of these ads. So I think you mentioned some JVC ads.
Yeah,
or
so
TVC.
we have been using the FE as our standard for effectiveness. And we scanned 17 FE commercials, and basically we identified the brain map that is triggered by these commercials. So then we tested new commercials for our clients, and we recognized for 3 of these commercials that they basically matched the ideal FE brain map, and we predicted that they were going to be an FE, and indeed these commercials have been recognized by the FE organization as a very effective commercial. So basically our score at this moment is still 100%.
Excellent. Thank you. Walter. Sorry. You gave an example of pizza. So tell us how this impacts the pizza category.
Okay, we had this pizza chain, nationwide stores, and they kept trying to increase their overall ratings for service protocols, measurement of service protocols, which is also known as Mr. Chopin measurements. And that's all left brain. It's all rational. It's all checking marks. Shorter time to say hi, shorter time, a nicer smile, whatever. And we kept telling them, no. You got to tackle the right side of the brain, the emotional processes underlying every decision, what people feel when they go to the stores for marketing exchanges. And after much struggling with them, they allowed us to do that, and we use GSR, we use eye tracking, we use EEG, drive course wireless, and we show them 17 different points never tackled before by the standard questionnaire. They had to reweight 4 dimensions, and they changed 9 different questions. And after doing that, the brand recognition grew up, the loyalty grew up, and actually the call to action grew by, like 13 points. I mean, it was significant values at all.
I will say that along categories, and since the Popeye study was across all categories in a grocery store, there's vast differences based on the category somebody's experiencing. So just in food alone, sweet baked, salty, some categories that we call more hedonic, have more conflict. And so it is those guilty pleasures, that things you want and things you think, maybe I shouldn't. And so the shouldn't takes over, which is what you said, your left brain. And what I want is your right brain. So I'm going to direct the next two to Anders and Ken. Ken, do you want to take this one?
Sure.
In terms of, so you guys are the branding guys. So tell me a little bit about what are your aha moments from a branding sense?
I think that the evolution of this whole area has been around understanding. It's a little bit like a boat where everyone's rushed to one side around emotion and they've left the rational. So we need to understand both what the rational, what the reason to believe is, and what the emotion is. So you can't just go after one aspect. Take Kimberly-Clark, for example, with their Huggies brand. That is a 70% emotional category. It's the most, in North America, it's the most emotional category that we've ever tested. 70% of the decisions for the first-time mum is based on an emotion, and that specific emotion is love. There's, of course, a combination of emotions, but the primary emotion driving consumption behaviour is love. And then on the reason to believe, it's leakage protection. So the rational primary driver is leakage protection. Now, Kimberly-Clark understands the relative importance of all of those drives and therefore understands what to brief the agency about in terms of its communication. So it's the really critical thing is understanding what the primary drivers of the emotions are. And so the difficulty, the previous speaker talked about the gold standard, fMRI. And I've seen lots of output of fMRI, and I've never seen anything that indicates what the discrete emotion is that is linked to the consumption behaviour. So if you want to actually implement some of this stuff with your creatives, you need to be able to say to them, this is the emotion that we're seeking to elicit in this communication, and then understand whether you've in fact elicited it or not.
And that's a clarifying experience for brand teams, and often they cannot get it down to a simple thing. So implicit response just in the methodology, you don't get to infinity words. So a brief, a classic brief doesn't work. You have to usually, have 3 or so words to focus on? What are you laddering up to? And that exercise alone is valuable because you cannot keep asking and you do not expose them to a paragraph. You want to end up, Anders?
Sure, absolutely. An aha moment for us, I think, so we offer metaphor elicitation, which is an online application of that. And what we recently worked on 3 different brands for Procter & Gamble, and they came to us and said, we know there's more insight to get. We don't know what it is. We've done all possible research, online research, ethnography, you name it. So it was kind of a daunting task to say, what else can we come up with? And so metaphor elicitation it's a technique where we help people to access their subconscious and put words onto it. And we were able to uncover some really new insights for the client, which really helped both spur innovation, but also their advertising campaign for these brands. So I think that as in research, we don't talk a lot about metaphors, but metaphors are actually essential to how we make sense of the world. And as Caroline used metaphors before, talking about how we understand research, you can see how we constantly use metaphor in language and make sense of we understand one object through the lens of another. So that's a powerful technique that we used, and very successfully so. And I think in an online environment, when we get sample sizes that are larger than the typical 10, 15 people, that used to be the case when, for those of you who have used ZMet, for example, that's just the power of combining a technique that allows people to do it en masse. And so that's been a big aha for us in terms of helping clients to develop their brands.
Great, thank you. Dan, I have a question. So you have been the spokesperson for the industry, a lot of press, and thank you for that, because especially during the campaign. So is there anything you want to layer on in terms of ahas? I'm a political economist by training, so I'm fascinated with how it impacts our voting. Anything you want to comment on, or it can go back to a business?
I'm going to go back to a business question, but I'll whet your appetite for some political stuff. Sure, I was on Fox the morning after Obama beat Hillary Clinton for the nomination. I walk into the green room, and the person who's going to be on before me is Karl Rove. So after I worked up my nerve a little bit, I said, Karl, did you expect this outcome? He said, no, I'll be honest with you. I had Obama at 20-1 odds. And after a pause, I said, well, I'll be equally honest with you, Karl. I had him at 2-1 odds by October of 07, which I did. So I beat Karl at his own game.
Great. Give me a business example of how, so with your book and other things, so it's starting to get people that are reading it, CMOs and CEOs who are saying, well, maybe there is something to this emotion.
Sure. Well, let's go back to another book that was referenced in the last presentation, Kahneman's book on the 2 systems of thinking. So the first system, is probably most of the people in the room know, is the intuitive, emotional, and the second one is the conscious and rational. Now, I imagine for a lot of traditional researchers, this makes them very comfortable because there's at least one half of the equation which is supposedly still entirely theirs, and they can just go at it with the usual methods. But I don't think so. If we'll take your answer of a moment ago, a reason to believe, that we need a rational, quote-unquote, reason to believe. Well, that's trust. If trust is the emotion of business, for instance, contempt is its opposite. Contempt means I don't trust you, I don't respect you, I discounted you, which is why in politics the first thing you do is try to hobble your opponent and say, nothing coming out of this guy's mouth is worth listening to.
Yeah.
But also you mentioned leakage. Well, I bet leakage is maybe a rational attribute, but I bet it genders emotional reactions like anger and disgust and so forth. So you're really going to have a hard time separating these two. The emotional brain is much older than the rational brain. Everyone feels before they think. So in our case, we use it for exposure, but we also use it for the Q&A. The value proposition is an emotional judgment in the end. Is the product good for me? Is it fair? Will it do what it's supposed to do? So we use it into the Q&A to really know if we can hit home on that, and that's how we are effective.
You know, one of the rules as researchers was we were taught that if you look at something and you see a significant difference, from that point on, you're kind of obligated to keep looking at it, so it just builds another tab and a banner point. So we know in the brain science that there are significant differences between men and women. We know in this now research that emotion plays a vastly different role in getting truth out of people, but it's the intersection of the rational brain and the irrational brain that is where the mystery is, and that's why we'll continue to use both methods. I want to turn to David and talk about how we integrate methods.
Absolutely. I'll tell by example. In fact, we're in the midst right now of exploring some work that will help one of our clients who's in the pest management business kind of reinvent how to talk about their products. And they're very much committed to the notion that a fundamental benefit of these products is how you feel about yourself and your home and the job you're doing, providing for your guests and taking care of your family by managing these kinds of challenges to a happy, healthy home. And so we are using the MindSight tool to be able to create a motivational profile, first of all, of how they would like to feel in an ideal situation, and secondarily then of how they do feel currently with using the products that this company has on the market right now. And as we do the latter, one of the things that we're going to be doing then, which is very much a complete integration, and it's in the way that it's been talked about before, about the intersection of reasons to believe and emotional end benefits, we'll be conducting, we'll run a MindSight, and that MindSight will have in fact 9 spikes which correspond to the 9 motives that we study. We'll then focus in on the 2 or 3 that are the very strongest motive, the strongest emotional benefits these products are supposed to deliver, and we'll run, essentially be running a max diff kind of analysis of all of the features and qualities of the product, asking the respondents to help us understand how important are these individual features in getting you to that end emotional state. So when we're done, we think we'll both be able to help this client understand what kind of an emotional end benefit story to create, but also what kinds of support points or reasons to believe in terms of actual product features they need to tell in order to provide a scaffold for those emotional benefits.
Thank you. How do we layer? So somebody else give me an example. I'll let you guys run.
So we pretty much advocate, what Dan was talking about, and Caroline too, that decision making is a combination of our cognitive and our emotional processes. And so the way we do this at Affectiva is we essentially integrate very seamlessly with existing survey engines. We basically just allow people to turn on their webcam as they're going through a digital experience, watching content, testing a product, testing a concept. You've got all your survey questions, as well as the moment-by-moment, facial expressions. And I think that's very complementary, and that's important. Yeah.
I want to turn to some of you who have been integrating this from a consulting side. So do you what are some ahas? So Walter, do you want to answer aha?
Thank you. Well, besides integrating on each project traditional research with neuro research, we've been able to combine EEG with eye tracking or EEG with GSR, for example, and put them all together into what we call neurometaphors. And neurometaphors is just an evaluation, psycholinguistics on the collective imagery of a particular population, crossed by the studies of semantics based on the cortex. In 2 words, what it means is we can position second by second any stimuli within what people knows, understands, thinks, any primal effect that might have on previous knowledge within not only a particular category, but whatever their surrounding day-to-day world is. Said so, for example, and back to the pizza example, we were able to tell the people that males felt and lived the store quite different from females, and they had to redesign the stores in terms of the environment. I referred to the Carolyn's example on the back wall, and everything has a role in the feeling and the experience that we have, and all tackles back into what our purchase decision is, and our feeling, and our ultimately in the brand identity and the loyalty that is being created for that brand or the particular service.
Excellent. I want to focus just a tiny bit of time on cultural overlay. So the brain is the brain is the brain, but there's a nature-nurture interaction, and when you start getting to milliseconds from subconscious to conscious, it gets tricky, and there are cultural overlays. Will somebody volunteer to take on cultural overlay? So where does it matter?
Well, one of the reasons I probably do facial coding is I lived in Italy as a boy. Italians are famous for body language. This does not mean I love you, I love you, I love you if they're sitting in traffic, by the way. But body language is very much affected by gender and culture. That's why I love facial coding, that Ekman and before that Charles Darwin came to realize that even a person born blind emotes the same way as you or I, that it's hardwired into the brain. Certainly the motivations, the triggers for why someone will do it. If you're in Japan, they may try to emote more briefly. But I remember speaking in China, and my guide the first day said, oh, the Chinese people are inscrutable. You won't be able to read our faces. Well, my guide was a native of Shanghai. The place was full of building cranes and pollution and traffic jams, and a profound look of sadness across this person's face. I didn't break his bubble and tell him that he just showed an emotion. He was not inscrutable. He's part of the human race.
Exactly. Any other examples? Has anybody?
So we have another image tool which doesn't focus on motivation, but really on the moment-to-moment experience. And it's, in fact, it's a crowdsourcing exercise in which we show each individual a couple of hundred images and then use a sort of a crowdsourcing math to distill themes. And one of the studies we did recently had to do with how you felt when you looked at a stack of clean laundry in your home. Okay, what did that feel like? And in China, one of the themes that we got, which was fabulous, was a whole series of images of beautiful paths moving into sort of, you know, forests and across ponds and sort of a, in fact, our Chinese consultant decided we were going to name that theme Promising Path Forward. But in Brazil, we had an emotional theme which involved red sports cars and diamond rings and piles of cash. So in this exact same moment, in this exact same sort of life-at-home lifestyle situation, we saw two wildly, and then of course once you take this stuff to the client and then to the agency, you know, and going further with trying to understand what that means and how you translate it, became a fascinating study in differences in culture.
Thank you. You want to add to that, Ken?
Well, I was just going to add, Michelle, that we're working in throughout Asia, Australia, and North America, and one of the things that we've discovered is this unevenness amongst the creative fraternity on actually how to embed emotion into communication. So we're finding it really challenging that once having identified the emotion that you're trying to elicit in the communication, then the creative agency being able to have the wherewithal to actually be able to elicit that. And then also, critically important, the client staying out of the way, because you cannot elicit an emotion explicitly. I can't say to you, cry. It's a piece of art. So clients that are very accustomed to setting out what the rational message is in the communication have to stand back and allow the agency to actually elicit this emotion. But as I said, we're finding it's very uneven, and which is an irony given that the creative fraternity have been telling the marketing research fraternity for forever and a day that they want emotion.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this over to Sid. I think you have a few words because you do work for from the agency side and the artistic side, working on some of the businesses that you've worked on in kind of what you would call the entertainment business.
Yeah, well, probably as we work with fMRI, we are completely focused on predicting sales. And emotions play a role, and cultural differences play a role, but probably one case is a good example how basically fMRI can help to predict sales, and that's we had a case for a Dutch publisher. They are publishing the magazine Cosmopolitan in the Netherlands in Dutch, and they had 3 covers that they wanted to figure out if one of the covers was more successful in raising the sales numbers. They did traditional research, and there were 3 kind of images. One was a sexy lady, one was a smart lady, and one was a strong lady. And basically all people in traditional research selected the sexy lady to be the most effective cover to raise sales. We did the same test in fMRI, and the fMRI figures showed that it was the smart lady that was going to be more effective. So they tested these 3 covers. They were distributed to the trade. They got returns, and it turned out to be indeed that the smart lady was indeed more effective in sales. And this exercise generated for these publishers a 10% extra revenue. And beauty in publishing is that every revenue extra is basically also profit. So it was 100% profit on this little exercise. So that is I think, there are different ways to apply neuro techniques, but predicting sales, then fMRI is an interesting tool.
I think where it becomes challenging is industries that are led by a different gender than the end user. So that's where the complexity of what we think they're going to want and what they really want. So if I showed you an image for the ladies in the room of a size 0 lady who says she's had 3 kids and she does marathons about every other week, what is your just visceral reaction? I'm reading facial expressions.
I am too. Disgust, etc.
And Carolyn, I love you. So in spite of, no, I think those images are ones that we assumed that were for us. They were aspirational. We got a lot of value out of that, and we were seeking this ideal woman. In reality, we said that B word, right? Like, no, I don't know any moms that look like that. You know, so the mirror neuron that we have inside our brain wants to see things that are like us, that we can relate and connect to. So I think those are the big ahas that we're learning in this industry, is it's not all what we thought, and it's getting complex. And what men want to see is slightly different than what women want to see in imagery. So as we're going down this journey, I want to wrap up the last couple minutes talking about how we pick which method. And I do think that I'm going to throw out a risk rigor. So when we used to do ad testing or any kind of big product launch, we had the big B-scan market, or we had test markets that we would create. And we would spend different amounts of money on those testing based on the risk of that new innovation or how much we were going to spend on that advertising campaign. I think something similar applies here. For really easy problems to solve, maybe there is an intersection that we can apply something that's more cost effective. And for the really hard problems to solve, we engage on that spectrum that Carolyn laid out for us. Any thoughts on this?
I think one of the dimensions to think about here is if you want to do this on an ongoing, like, repeatable process, right? And so one example is Unilever. We work with Millward Brown, and so every single copy that Unilever comes out with globally has to be tested with our technology. And that means we've created normative data within product category, within markets, within countries, that Unilever can use to just continuously track how their different ads are doing. And I think to do that, you've got to be scalable, you've got to be automated, you've got to be, like, really easy to do. So that's one dimension. Whereas if you're not really interested in doing this in a, you know, if it's a quick, not quick, but if it's a one-off, you know, research project.
Again, if you do it from a scientific design, I have a huge hypothesis that senior management has it in their heads that they're going to do X. That's, to me, where it's not the same as every single ad. It's a bigger problem. Right. It's to get to your branding. What should this brand stand for? How should this ad communicate? A whole campaign. So it's that higher order strategic questioning that we need to get to.
Well, I think we have to distinguish between getting responses to, let's say, 2 alternative ads, which is something already created, and that's a fairly easy read to see which one that works better. And I think that a lot of the techniques represented here can do that. The harder challenge, I think, for a lot of marketing applications is when before you even get into creation, before you have an ad, before you have a packaging, all those foundational insights that goes into branding and innovation. That's where I think that we have to be much smarter at how we combine methods. And I think that oftentimes, I think that the problem is that we're kind of throwing everything out for one methodology and say, this is going to solve the world and let's do this. But rather, we need to be really smart about how we combine new approaches with tried and true approaches. You know, and don't forget observational methods and all other things that we need to combine with this to make the most out of it. I think the one thing we all can agree to is that we need to stop asking questions that people can't answer. And there's too much research out there that is done, and we're all guilty of it at some point, of asking questions that people can't assess properly, and that's key to not answer.
And on that note, we heard in the earlier sessions, we're going to have less time with respondents in the future as we move into mobile and other applications. So we're going to have to cut somewhere, and this would make a lot of sense to cut that stuff that is low value in terms of believability at the end. We're going to wrap now. We're out of time, but what we're going to do is allow our panelists are going to be around, and hopefully you'll recognize them. Ask them some good questions at the reception. And thank you so much. You guys shared the stage very nicely, so thank you.